creating food rules, right? And what I mean by this, like obviously there's certain ways you can go about this that are negative or potentially harmful, such as, oh, our food rule is we're not eating carbohydrates or we're not eating fats or whatever, right? Um, that can potentially be a negative, right? But you can also create food rules overall. Like, intermittent fasting would basically be like a food rule. I'm like, I'm eating, my eating window is between here and here, or I'm doing like alternate day fasting. It's again a food rule, right? Stuff like that. I'm not eating after like 6 p.m. It's a food rule, right? Or 7 p.m. or whatever makes sense, right? Like they're just rules that you've created. They're somewhat arbitrary, but they solve a problem for you, right? In terms of the diet, right? So let's say you're pretty good with the calories, you're pretty good with overall everything, but in the evening, that's your downfall. You have I don't know, packet of crisps, some biscuits, you have some tea, and it's like it gets out of hand calorie wise. And you're like, if you can just cut that out, all of a sudden you're like, most of my problems are actually solved. If we have a food rule, and this is not necessarily to say that this is the way I would deal with that, but this is one way that people do deal with it, right? They'll be like, right, my food rule is I'm not going to eat after 8 o'clock or whatever time it is, right? All of a sudden it gets rid of all of those extra calories that you didn't necessarily need, and then all of a sudden you're like, bro, I'm actually able to get the results that I wanted. So there are different food rules. Portion control, like the methods we've described earlier on, they could fall under the category of food rules. Like we're just creating rules around food. It's like, oh, you have to have this amount of portion size of protein and carbohydrates and fats and veg and whatever else, right? Like they're food rules. Some of them are somewhat arbitrary, some of them are a bit more specific. But like it is this concept of creating food rules, it is beneficial and potentially negative, right? For example, like if we just go, oh, our food rule is we're not drinking alcohol, it's like that might work, but it might also not work, because it might be a case that like how you socialize with all your friends is alcohol. So it's like, do you now give up all your friends? It's like, how are we going to navigate that? Like just creating a food rule isn't going to solve that situation from you. It's probably going to isolate you from your friends, right? And maybe you need to get new friends. I don't know the situation, but that is something we need to be aware of. So what are your thoughts on like just creating food rules to help us with the diet, help us stick to a calorie deficit in this case, because we're looking at fat loss? What are your thoughts, Gary?
Yeah, I think food rules can actually be useful. Like, I think there's like they get a lot of negative rep in the fitness industry because there's obviously the case that if you have excessive food rules, that can become quite disordered and you end up, retracting socially. You're not able to engage in social events and you've a really bad relationship with certain foods and the foods that you enjoy. Oh, excuse me, jeepers.
No yawning on the podcast.
Etc. But there are some good examples of food rules that could be useful. So, for example, at the moment, I actually like getting a takeaway maybe once a week. You know, dare I say it, but I like getting a
Only
takeaway.
once a week.
Yeah, or some sort of like quite indulgent meal. I would be able to save myself a lot of calories if I took that out per week. That's obviously not what I want at the moment, but it might be the case that let's say I was running a 6 week fat loss phase where I was trying to lose weight. A food rule that would be useful would be okay, on Wednesday nights, instead of getting a takeaway, what I'm going to do is cook a steak dinner for myself that will be 500 calories less. Boom, saved 500 calories there. That's it, done.
What
Probably
might be actually better for you would be, cooking some like sushi, so you actually eat some fish.
no, thank you. So yeah, any meal of your choice, you can have a sushi if you wish. But the basic idea there is that you're creating some sort of rule that is not necessarily overly restrictive. Like you're just not having a takeaway. Like that's not that bad, and you're only doing it for a certain period of time. You're not saying, I will never have a takeaway again in my entire life, because that's what people do. And because they have that in their head, if they ever do have an opportunity to have whatever they've decided to restrict themselves, they go all out and don't control it at all, because in their head, they're thinking, well, I'm not going to have the chance to do this again, so I may as well get it all out of my system. So you have to be careful with food rules in that sense. Like if you say, I'm never going to eat chocolate again, and you are the type of person who like chocolate is your favorite food, that's not going to work out too well, because what's going to happen is 2 weeks down the line, someone's going to give you a square of chocolate and you'll say, oh, well, I've messed it all up now. I may as well enjoy as much chocolate as I possibly can so that tomorrow I can go back to my zero tolerance rule. Okay. So when you're coming up with these rules, make sure they're reasonable, make sure they're things that you can actually stick to. It doesn't have to be something that you stick to forever. But it might be, that some things actually are worth sticking to forever. For example, it might be, when I sit down in the evening with my cup of tea, I have two biscuits, and that's my rule, the two biscuit rule, just so that it's just something that's a piece of structure that you can then make into a habit, and it just becomes the norm. Because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to make these little rules and strategies into habits so that they are just your norm basically forever. Okay. Because yeah, that's it really. It's pretty simple. Come up with your own rules.